The evening sky enveloped the palace in a soft golden glow, reflecting off the towering domes and the slender spires that rose gracefully skyward. Inside the main hall, the emperor sat upon his throne. In his hand, he held a single document. At the end of the stairs, the nobles stood in neat rows, their heads bowed in respect. Not a single one dared to speak. There were also 2 men standing upon the red staircase. From the letter of surrender of the Duchy of Shidate to the territorial expansion beyond the Halleck iron mines. "This is something even the previous king failed to accomplish," the king said softly, yet each word carried weight, falling like a hammer in the silent hall. "Well done, Margrave," the king said once more. Hearing the praise, the Margrave lowered his head further and briefly closed his eyes. His shoulders loosened slightly, not out of relief, but because he knew that praise from a king always came with consequences. Meanwhile, upon the throne, the king rested his chin on his index finger. A faint smile appeared on his face, too calculated to be called kind. He then said that he had carefully considered what reward would be appropriate for such service. His voice was gentle, yet carried an unseen pressure. The Margrave lifted his face slightly, his brows knitting together. Doubt flickered in his eyes, the instinct of a seasoned veteran who knew that rewards from the throne were often heavier than punishment. The king leaned forward, his gaze sharp and piercing. Then, suddenly, he changed the subject. "Isn't it true that your successor has already passed the ideal age for marriage because he has been too occupied with war?" He added that the royal family should bear responsibility for that matter as well. The words hung in the air. The Margrave froze. The hand that had been calm clenched beneath his cloak. His jaw tightened, the veins at his temple tensing. He did not answer immediately, and the silence itself was answer enough. The king questioned the Margrave again without waiting for a reply. "How old is your son this year?" The Margrave hesitated for a moment. Cold sweat trickled down his temple before he finally answered politely, "This year, Eric is 24 years old, Your Majesty." Hearing this, the king narrowed his eyes slightly, then smiled faintly. "That is the perfect age," the king said. "I will give you a very beautiful younger sister." The panel showed Eric standing upright in a neat, noble uniform, handsome yet devoid of excessive expression, as if he would accept any decision made by the king as his duty. On the other side, the Margrave was stunned. His eyes widened, his breath caught. In his mind, a single thought surfaced. Isn't she the princess whose very existence is unknown to anyone? Is the king truly going to offer that princess? Unease was clearly visible on the Margrave's face. As if sensing his anxiety, the king spoke again. He said that this would be the first time the Margrave's family would lay eyes upon the princess. Then, the great doors of the royal hall slowly opened. The soft sound of the doors sliding apart broke the silence that had been hanging heavily over the chamber. Light from within the hall poured through the widening gap. A young girl stood at the threshold. Her hair was long and pale blonde, hanging loose without any ornament. She wore a simple dress, tied at the waist with a thin ribbon, an appearance far too plain for a princess of the royal family. Her face remained shrouded in shadow. Several knights standing in the hall turned their heads unconsciously. Some held their breath, while others frowned in reflex not because of her beauty, but because of the unsettling sense of something being terribly amiss. Then, in a clear voice filled with pride, the king spoke. "Allow me to introduce her. She is the princess of the kingdom of Esquilier, and the younger sister whom I cherish most. Her name is Miesa Esquilier." As the light fell upon her face, a pair of blue eyes came into view, vacant and restless. Her gaze wandered without focus, as if she did not truly understand where she was. On the other side of the hall, Eric's expression, calm until now, changed instantly. His eyes widened in shock at the sight of the princess before him. The two locked eyes. Miesa's empty gaze fixed itself on Eric. Smiling, the king said that the princess was very shy. He then called Miesa to come closer to his side. Miesa replied in an unclear voice and began to move in obedience to the king's command. As she stepped forward hesitantly, both of her hands clutched the fabric of her dress, her fingers stiff. Her feet were bare, the soles pale and marked with faint scars that had not yet fully healed. Her steps were unsteady. Several times, she nearly lost her balance until she finally collapsed onto the floor in the middle of the hall. Seeing this, the king did not appear embarrassed in the slightest. Instead, he smiled happily and told everyone to be understanding, explaining that the princess had a special condition. The Margrave lowered his head and said that it was an honor for his family to welcome Her Highness the Princess. Yet inside his heart, his thoughts churned violently. Can something like this truly be called a princess? Beside him, Eric also spoke. He vowed that he would not disappoint His Majesty the King, nor Her Highness the Princess. Eric's father turned to look at his son, surprised by his sudden declaration. The king's smile widened further. He then called Eric forward, telling him to take a closer look at his future bride. Eric, who had remained silent until now, finally stepped forward. He stopped before Miesa, knelt on one knee, and gently took her hand in a formal gesture. "It is an honor for me to serve Your Highness," Eric said. However, just as Eric was about to kiss the back of her hand, something unexpected happened. Miesa suddenly yanked her hand away with force. The reaction startled Eric. Miesa stepped back. Her eyes widened, her breathing became erratic, and her body trembled as though she were facing something utterly terrifying. The king looked extremely pleased by her reaction. He called Miesa back to his side. She staggered as she walked toward him. While stroking Miesa's head, the king said that the princess had behaved rudely and must apologize. Miesa opened her mouth and let out a sound like that of a small dog. The entire hall fell silent. Eric could only stand there, rigid and unable to say a single word. After that, the scene shifts. A carriage moves away from the palace. Inside, the Margrave sits across from a woman. The atmosphere is silent, devoid of conversation. The Margrave's gaze sharpens as memories surface of the long war and of the family that stood at the center of its victory, House Cladnier. Yet even that had failed to satisfy the king, driving him to propose this marriage. The panel changes again. A dark night sky stretches above a grand structure of bluish-gray stone. A crescent moon hangs between drifting clouds, illuminating rows of towering spires. The palace windows glow with light, a sign that activity still continues within despite the late hour. In that stillness, a voice breaks the silence tense, filled with unease. Inside the hall, a long table is laid out with neatly arranged tableware. A richly patterned carpet spreads across the floor, reinforcing the formality of the gathering. Several people sit around the table, yet the atmosphere is anything but calm. The Margrave slams his fist against the table, shattering the silence. He cannot accept the king's treatment. How could the king repay their loyalty with an idiotic princess? He snarls. Eric remains silent, his expression flat as always. Yet in his heart, he knows one truth. The king's command is absolute. And this marriage is now unavoidable. Even without love as its foundation, as the young master of House Cladnier, he must see it through. Then a man finally dares to speak up, asking what will become of the engagement with House Crispin. He is Eric's cousin, Emberic Cladnier. The Margrave scoffs. Is that even worth asking? It no longer holds any meaning. He then turns to his wife. Are you not angered by this, Taliesa? His wife remains standing in silence, gazing at a painting. When her face is shown, she is revealed to be the woman who had accompanied the Margrave in the carriage earlier. She grips a bottle in her hand. Taliesa's expression is calm, yet her eyes suggest she is deep in thought. A flashback follows. Sometime earlier, Taliesa is seated in a room with two palace attendants. A prior exchange has clearly shocked them. One of the attendants states firmly that the princess must not be given a separate bedroom. Taliesa explains calmly that, as they can see, the two chambers are directly connected by a corridor. But her explanation is rejected outright. Lady Cladnier, are you not aware that the princess's condition is special? If Her Highness were to faint in the middle of the night, it would be a serious matter. And should that happen, His Majesty would surely be enraged. Their words press heavily upon Taliesa. Their stern expressions reveal their displeasure with her decision. Taliesa's previously calm demeanor falters. She presses a hand to her forehead and closes her eyes. I can assign attendants, she says. Her reply only deepens their shock. One of them, thin and sharp-voiced, raises his voice. Do you intend to entrust the princess solely to servants? The other quickly adds, His Majesty will be furious if he learns of this. Talisa glares at them coldly. The scene returns to the present. Remembering that exchange, Talisa's anger boils over. So that was their true aim, to force us to care for that princess? She snaps. How dare they do this to the heir of House Cladnier? From a distance, Eric watches his mother. That night is filled with fear and sorrow, yet Eric remains unchanged, as composed as ever until the day finally arrives. Morning dawns before a large building. Sunlight spills across the city streets and the rows of wooden houses lining the road. A gold-adorned carriage moves slowly through the plaza, the sound of iron wheels echoing against the stone pavement. People stop in their tracks. Some turn their heads, others whisper softly as they watch the carriage pass. News of the marriage between the noble princess and the brave knight who won the war brings smiles to the faces of citizens weary from years of conflict. Inside the carriage, Eric observes their joy and thinks to himself, to those who know nothing of the truth, this marriage must look like a beautiful fairy tale. Before long, a grand church comes into view by the water's edge. A massive dome rises at its center, flanked by symmetrical towers marking it as the city's principal place of worship. Pale stone walls reflect the daylight, while the gardens and pools surrounding it exude tranquility so starkly opposed to the tension elsewhere. Inside the church, guests whisper among themselves. So the princess has finally revealed herself. What kind of woman has she become? Their curiosity grows, fueled by the rumors that have spread. A woman begins to speak of one such rumor, but her voice falters. As her eyes widen, Lord and Lady Margrave have arrived. Soon after, a guard approaches the Margrave and whispers that His Majesty regrets he cannot attend the wedding ceremony. The Margrave stiffens in shock. The guard hurriedly adds, Fortunately, the princess herself has arrived safely. The Margrave clenches his fist, unable to accept the king's treatment. Does he truly intend to turn my family into a laughingstock? He brushes past the guard and strides away, seething with anger. At last, the wedding ceremony is about to begin. The priest asks the guests to take their seats and calls for the groom to step onto the podium. Eric stands tall. His dark hair is neatly combed, his expression calm yet rigid. His gaze is fixed forward, as though he has long mastered the art of hiding emotion behind formality. He wears white ceremonial attire adorned with gold across the chest and sleeves, a long cloak draping from his shoulders, an unmistakable symbol of his status. He barely moves, yet his presence alone weighs heavily on the room. Then the doors open slowly, their creak breaking the silence. The princess is welcomed inside. Miesa wears a white wedding gown. The fabric is thick and layered with lace, falling neatly to the floor. Two attendants flank her, carefully adjusting and arranging the folds of her dress. Her face is pale, her eyes wide, as though she is utterly unprepared for what is happening. From afar, whispers ripple through the crowd. Is something wrong with the princess? She looks drunk. She can't even walk properly. Their voices echo clearly through the hall. Eric waits atop the podium. Moments later, the priest begins the ceremony. Groom, Eric Cladnier. Bride, Miesa Esquilier. Do you swear before the gods to become each other's lifelong companions? With a kiss to seal their vow, the two are officially declared husband and wife. The panel shifts once more. Eric stands before a door, accompanied by two palace attendants who appear to have escorted him there. One of them warns him coldly, You must not injure the princess during the consummation tonight. We will come tomorrow morning to collect proof. Eric replies evenly, Understood. He opens the door and steps inside. But the sight before him leaves him stunned. Eric had never expected to find Miesa lying on the bed, her wrists and ankles bound. Eric's attention is suddenly drawn elsewhere. His eyes widen once more. Again, he sees something utterly unnatural. Several medicine bottles lie scattered across the bed. What are those? Sedatives? With this amount, they could calm a horse and still have some left over. How could they administer sedatives to someone who looks as though she is barely surviving on starvation? Even prisoners of war are not treated this way. Question after question floods his mind. Who would dare to commit something so disgraceful without hesitation? There is no way they would do this without the king's direct orders. This is a truly shocking sight, Eric mutters. He grits his teeth, anger surging within him. Then Eric grips Miesa's ankle and begins loosening the bindings. It seems you're cold, he says softly. I'll untie you. Your body is freezing. Are you all right? His hands brush against her soles and ankles. Dark bruises from the tight restraints are clearly visible. Her fingertips have even turned blue. Eric stares at her for a long moment. There's no way she's fine, he thinks. His gaze shifts to her wrists, which are also bound. That must hurt, being tied like that. I'll untie your wrists as well, Eric says quietly. At last, the final knot comes undone. The strip of cloth slips from her skin and falls softly to the floor. After removing all the bindings, Eric crouches down, examining her wrists and fingertips still bluish from being restrained for far too long. If this continues, it will be dangerous. He stands again, considering what he should do next. After settling on a course of action, Eric climbs onto the bed, positioning himself carefully beside her. My lady, he says gently, I'm going to come under the blanket. You don't need to be afraid. Miesa looks at him. As he holds her beneath the covers, Eric introduces himself. My name is Eric. I am the son of House Cladnier. I am 24 years old, and I have no siblings. I once had a younger sister, but she died in an accident when we were children. I have spent most of my life guarding the border during the war against the Duchy of Shidate. And today, you became my wife through our wedding ceremony. From up close, one of Eric's arms rests above the pillow, his muscles still tense even at rest. His other hand lies lightly on Miesa's shoulder. She remains silent, her hair spread across the pillow. Eric pauses, slightly startled by her unresponsive stare. To what extent can she even understand what I'm saying? Even so, it is only right that I explain the situation to her. Eric takes her hand, gently holding her fingers. Winters at the border are extremely cold. Often, our fingertips become inflamed from the cold. In times like that, it's important to ensure proper blood circulation throughout the body. Suddenly, Eric freezes. Miesa has already fallen asleep. Her pale blonde hair frames her face, partially covering her cheeks and temples. Her eyes are tightly shut, her eyelashes calm and still. Her breathing is soft and steady, showing she has entered a deep sleep. Eric rises slowly. Judging by her skin tone returning to normal, her condition seems much better. After resting, she should recover further. Then he thinks, I still need to prepare proof of the first night. He looks around, then notices a pair of glasses on the table. When morning arrives, Eric is already prepared. In his hand, he holds a piece of white cloth stained with blood. This is proof of our consummation, he says. The two palace attendants stand before him. Eric hands them the cloth. As they receive it, they exchange suspicious glances. Very well, they say. We will deliver this to the priest. Suddenly, one of them walks past Eric toward the bedroom. Then I'll prepare the princess immediately. Eric stops her, gripping the door handle firmly. The princess has not awakened yet. Do it later. Reluctantly, the two attendants leave. Eric closes the door and turns around only to freeze. Miesa is biting a piece of cloth. My lady, that isn't food, Eric says gently. You must be hungry. Please wait a moment. He notices a basket of food, takes out a piece of bread, and offers it to her. How about this? Miesa responds haltingly, stretching out her hand to take the bread. Eric is stunned. She eats it. Eric crouches in front of her, looking directly at her face. I'm glad you like it, he says softly. A small smile forms on his lips. For the first time, a genuine smile appears on Eric's face, one filled with sincerity as he cares for Miesa. The panel shifts again. It is afternoon at the Cladnier estate. The young master has returned, someone announces. Eric, Miesa, and two attendants stand in the courtyard. I have returned with the princess, Eric says. The Margrave and Taliesa stand at the entrance, accompanied by two personal attendants, welcoming the heir of House Cladnier. Eric's father responds only briefly. In his heart, however, he deeply dislikes this situation. The Margrave orders them to rest. As he turns to lead them inside the mansion, a panicked shout suddenly rings out. "My lady! That's dangerous. Please come down." The servants panic as Miesa attempts to climb a bear statue. Eric quickly restrains her, holding her body to prevent her from falling. "You mustn't climb that," another servant cries. After some time, the situation finally calms. Eric is now carrying Miesa in his arms. The Margrave watches, visibly irritated. Talesa, meanwhile, stares on without expression. Eric silently meets his parents' gaze. One of the palace attendants speaks up. "Leave the princess to me. You must be tired, go rest." Eric refuses. "You two must be exhausted after the long journey. Please unload your belongings and rest." The attendants laugh coldly. "Then we'll take our leave." Eric calls for the head butler. "From today onward, the princess is part of our family. Please take special care when attending to her. Her condition is special." "Understood. I will be attentive. You need not worry," the head butler replies. They hurry off. Talesa remains standing, watching them disappear. She says nothing. The scene shifts to the family dining hall. Everyone is gathered for the meal. The palace attendants are also present. Eric turns to them. "I will feed my wife myself. You may leave." "It's fine," one attendant replies with a thin smile. "The princess often causes trouble during meals." Eric's gaze turns cold. "Are there any foods she dislikes?" "No, she can eat anything." Eric feeds Miesa a piece of meat. "My lady, please try this." She chews, then suddenly spits the meat straight into Eric's face. Miesa erupts into chaos, flinging the food before her. Eric tries to calm her. The once quiet room erupts into noise. "Is there something you don't like?" Eric asks, but Miesa only screams wildly. He restrains her hands to stop her from causing further havoc. The two attendants look pleased. Eric glances sideways, irritation flashing briefly across his face. The princess is a mess. She should be bathed. The attendants accept the request, though their expressions darken. Eric returns to the table. The Margrave is seething with rage. He makes a subtle hand signal. It asks, "Should we let her live any longer?" Talesa sneers faintly, then responds with a serious expression. "If we kill that woman, we will all die." Beside them, Eric remains silent, his face calm, yet his thoughts clearly elsewhere. After that, we are given information about the kingdom of Esquilier. Within the kingdom of Esquilier, there are noble families known as the Three Pillars. The Salakezi family, which built the kingdom's internal stability. The Crispin family, which maintains domestic security. The Cladnier family, which guards the kingdom's external security. Each of these three families holds an essential role in the kingdom's security and military power. The former king of Esquilier had 3 queens, each originating from one of the 3 pillars. From the first queen, the daughter of Duke Salakeze, a prince was born. That prince later became a tyrant, Vermalik II. He failed to fulfill his duties as a king and ruled only through tyranny under the pretense of restoring the kingdom's power. With his own hands, he slaughtered his mother's family, the Salakezi. That was not enough. Still unsatisfied, the king continued to oppress the remaining 2 families. Unable to endure the king's oppression any longer, the 2 families secretly agreed to cooperate. They arranged an engagement between their successors and planned a rebellion to take place after the war ended. However, the plan did not unfold as intended. The outstanding achievements of the Cladnier family in the recent war succeeded in swaying the hearts of citizens who had grown weary of tyranny. But the king did not allow this shift to last long. Returning to the present situation, the Margrave clenched his fists, veins bulging as his hands trembled. Even his entire body shook as he struggled to restrain his overflowing rage. "How dare they give you a woman who is not even sane, someone who can't even eat properly?" the Margrave shouted. His wife, Talesa, tried to calm him down. "That child used to be normal too, wasn't she? She became that way after witnessing people from the kingdom die right in front of her. Isn't she a pitiful child?" Hearing that, the Margrave snapped. "Who are you pitying?" He then turned his gaze toward Eric. "Even this morning, some of our followers dared to say that Emberic should take your position. The Crispin family wants an heir from us. They said that everything could be resolved by simply replacing the successor. Do you understand what that means? Your position is threatened because of that insane woman. Eric remained silent, expressionless. His gaze was flat, as if he did not care about his father's words. Then Taliesa asked the Margrave, "Is Grand Duke Hegel still hesitating as well?" The Margrave replied with a scornful tone, "That man is weak-hearted too. I don't know whether his ability to think was damaged by that accident or what. Grand Duke Hegel, the king's cousin. The only remaining member of the royal family besides the princess. A crucial figure whose support was absolutely necessary to legitimize the rebellion. At one point, he suffered an accident that left him crippled and unable to have an heir. Since then, he had lived his days like a recluse." Suddenly, the Margrave's emotions exploded. He slammed both hands onto the table. "Damn it, nothing is going right. Not a single thing." Then the Margrave stormed out of the dining room in anger. Eric glanced at his father's retreating figure. "To think he can't even control his own temper," Eric muttered. Taliesa poured a drink into her glass. She then asked Eric for his opinion regarding the unification of the two families through marriage. Eric answered immediately. From the beginning, he believed the marriage was too forced. With the king already enraged, there was no reason to hold a wedding ceremony and draw attention. With the successor to the throne still unclear, they had no idea how many years it would take to persuade the aristocrats, or how long the Marquess's daughter could maintain her status as unmarried. A silhouette of a red-haired woman sitting in a noble family's chair appeared in his thoughts. Taliesa realized that what her son said was true. The longer they remained on the battlefield, the weaker their grasp on politics became. She had not expected that even Eric, still so young, could see the situation so clearly. Taliesa reached a conclusion they would have to hurt the princess. Eric calmly replied that they should observe the situation's progress first. Taliesa continued, "In that case, it's fine if you don't wish to burden the servants further. But do not give her affection." Hearing his mother's words, Eric was startled. "There is nothing more shallow than a man's affection. I don't expect more even from my own son. If you intend to take that warmth back someday, it would be better if you never gave it in the first place." Taliesa paused briefly. Then she continued, "What I mean is don't make that poor child even more confused." That brought the long conversation between Eric and his mother to an end. Eric headed back toward his room, still thinking about his mother's words. Does mother also think it would be better if I eliminated the princess? But Eric recalled how the palace had treated the princess when he first saw her tied up in her room, her legs and fingers turning blue. Back then, Miesa had been able to sleep peacefully only when Eric was beside her. That memory troubled him. Then voices echoed down the corridor. Eric quickened his pace. A light was still on in one of the rooms. As he approached, he realized the voices belonged to two servants ordering Miesa to get onto the bed. They were shouting and scolding the princess so loudly that Eric could hear them from a distance. The palace servants were confused because Miesa was not as quiet as usual. "Is she more energetic because she ate too much?" one servant said. A plump servant spoke next. "By the way, did you see the expressions on their faces earlier?" His companion replied that he had. It was incredible, truly astonishing. Suddenly, a voice spoke. "You've done your job well." The two servants froze in shock. Stuttering, they addressed the young master by name. In his heart, Eric thought, "I only heard part of their conversation from outside the room. But I can clearly see how they've been treating the princess all this time." Eric continued, "I will be watching over the lady now. You may return." Those words caught Miesa's attention. For a moment, she looked toward Eric. Sweat ran down the servants' faces. Their hands clenched, their closed tightly as they avoided meeting Eric's gaze. With clear irritation, one of them said, "Very well, we'll leave, but we'll be back tomorrow." Eric looked at Miesa, who was sitting on the bed with her back to him. The room fell silent. Neither Eric nor Miesa spoke. "It seems her ladyship is in a good mood today," Eric said, breaking the silence. Miesa calmly adjusted her loose hair. Eric approached and sat beside her. "This is a mansion in the capital," he said. "From now on, we'll be alternating between staying here and the Cladis estate. I hope you'll be comfortable here. Is there anything that has made you uncomfortable so far? Eric asked. Miesa did not answer. She did not even look at him. Looking at her, Eric thought to himself, she looked at me earlier when I entered. But now she seems uninterested. His attention shifted to the clothes Miesa was wearing. Does her ladyship have no clothes other than these? Even prisoners? Before he could finish the thought, Miesa suddenly lifted her face. Her blonde hair slid aside, and her eyes met Eric's directly. The face that had been flat and expressionless moments ago now looked bright, gentle, and alive. Eric froze. His gaze was locked onto Miesa's eyes, unprepared for the sudden change. No words were spoken, only a silence that felt different from before. Then, without warning, Miesa leaned closer to Eric. And something unexpected happened. She blew air at his face. Miesa looked utterly amusing in her childish behavior. The tension from earlier vanished instantly. Eric stood frozen, his expression clearly shocked. Wiping his face, he said, "Your Highness, you must not spit on people." He gently patted Miesa's shoulder. "You should rest first. I still have some work to finish." In his heart, Eric thought, what on earth was I thinking? Then he added, "Call me if you need anything." Eric turned and left the room. Miesa remained silent. She bit her lip. What was it that Miesa truly wanted? Did she want Eric to kiss her? Or was it merely another one of her childish antics? No one knew. Late at night, the Cladnir mansion stood silent beneath the dark sky, its black towers piercing the heavy clouds. The curtain of one window remained open, moonlight slipping through the gap. Inside the room, the curtain shifted gently. Moonlight filtered through the large window, bathing the room in a cold, bluish hue. On the bed, Eric and Miesa lay side by side beneath the covers. Eric lay on his back, his face calm, eyes closed. His posture remained neat and unchanged, indicating a deep sleep. Miesa lay on the other side, her body slightly turned. Her blonde hair spread across the pillow, partly covering her shoulder. One hand gripped the blanket near her chest, her fingers tense. The light outside suddenly grew brighter. Miesa flinched. Her eyes widened, her breath caught. She clutched the blanket more tightly. Her lips parted slightly, yet no sound came out. Beside her, Eric remained asleep, unaware of the change next to him. Up close, Miesa's expression showed clear tension. Her blue eyes stared blankly ahead, as though her mind was trapped between wakefulness and fear, in a night that refused to let her go. Morning light bathed the mansion in a soft glow as it filtered through the tall windows. The dining room was neat and quiet. Eric and Miesa sat side by side at the table, while the servants stood at a respectful distance, their movements small and careful. Eric took a spoonful of soup. He turned slightly toward Miesa and spoke in a low, polite voice. "Was there anything that made you uncomfortable while sleeping last night?" Miesa held a piece of bread in her hand. Her shoulders were hunched, her face looking weary. She did not turn to him, nor did she answer. Her jaw moved slowly as she chewed the bread without haste. Eric waited for a moment, then continued more cautiously. He said that it was only natural for her to still be adjusting to a new environment. His hand moved gently, bringing the spoon closer to Miesa's lips, as if offering it. "If you don't have an appetite, that's fine," he said with concern, "but you still need to eat to keep your strength." Miesa continued chewing. She did not open her mouth, did not look at Eric, only kept her gaze lowered to the bread in her hand. Eric watched her from the side, his expression restrained. He fell silent. The spoon stopped in midair. Crumbs began to smear Miesa's face. Her expression remained listless, yet she kept chewing without concern. She looks more exhausted than usual. Just last night, she seemed fine, Eric thought. In a soft voice, he spoke again. "At least eat a little more." Suddenly, Miesa reached out and plunged her hand into the bowl of soup. The dining room fell into complete silence. Miesa clenched the soup in her hand, the liquid dripping between her fingers. She lifted it to her mouth and ate it just like that. Her face looked silly and innocent as she chewed, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Eric startled. His eyes widened, his body tensing slightly. He stared at Miesa in disbelief, clearly not expecting what had just happened. The past few days since the princess arrived had been unusually busy. The atmosphere within the Kleidner estate had shifted rapidly, especially after Eric married the princess. In the training grounds, the sound of clashing weapons echoed constantly. The morning air was filled with ringing metal and the steady footsteps of soldiers training without pause. Eric walked past them. The soldiers who noticed him immediately greeted him loudly, addressing him as captain. The greetings came one after another, yet beneath them was a subtle difference. The air felt heavy, as if everyone had something to say, but chose to hold it back. Eric stopped and looked at the soldiers standing still. He asked why they were just standing there and whether the day's training had already ended. Several soldiers flinched at his voice. Nervously, they replied that the training was not yet finished. The change in atmosphere was not limited to the training grounds. Margrave Kleidner had gradually stopped eating with the family. He openly stated that merely looking at the princess made him lose his appetite. This attitude irritated Lady Kleidner. She disliked how her husband allowed his emotions to run unchecked. The followers and subordinates of the Kleidner family were also confused by these changes. No one truly knew how they should behave. Yet no one openly expressed dissatisfaction toward Eric. Eric stood amid all of it exactly as he always had. Calm, controlled, and unmoved. As though nothing had changed at all. After training ended, Eric wiped the sweat from his face and asked a servant about the young lady's whereabouts. The servant replied that since morning, the young lady had been wandering around the mansion. At present, she was in the servants' work area. The door to a room was half open. From the gap, the sound of warm, lively conversations spilled out, in stark contrast to the quiet corridors of the mansion. Inside the servants' room, the air felt warmer. Piles of clean clothes were neatly stacked on the floor, forming a soft base. On top of them, Miesa lay on her side. Her body was relaxed, her eyes closed, her blonde hair spread across the white fabrics, shimmering softly in the light. She had been sleeping without moving at all. Several servants sat or lay around her, watching with admiration. One servant gazed at Miesa and remarked that the young lady must be very comfortable lying on the piles. She added that Miesa had been sleeping soundly without waking. Another servant chimed in, saying that with clothes piled that high, it must feel like a warm, soft bed. However, a servant standing nearby looked uneasy. She asked whether it was really acceptable to let the young lady lie there, pointing out that even though the clothes had been washed, they still belonged to the servants. The servant beside her smiled and said she had once seen a cat that looked exactly like the young lady. She said its fur was the purest white she had ever seen. Another servant responded enthusiastically, saying the cat must have been incredibly adorable. Their conversation flowed lightly. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. The servants jolted. The door opened slowly with a creak of hinges. One of the servants exclaimed in surprise, greeting the young master who had just arrived. Eric stood at the doorway. His gaze immediately fell upon Miesa, lying atop the pile of clothes. He asked whether the two palace servants had disappeared again. One servant answered nervously that it was true. She said they were temporarily covering the palace servants' duties and taking care of the young lady instead. Another servant quickly added that they had already asked the head maid to inform Lady Kleidner that the young lady was with them. Eric nodded slightly. One servant explained that the floor was too cold and hard, so they had laid the young lady atop the clothes. Without saying another word, Eric bent down and lifted Miesa into his arms. As he carried her, Eric said that the servants had done well and told them to return to their work. He added that from here on, he would take care of the young lady himself. Eric walked out while holding Miesa. His steps were slow as he moved through the corridor and climbed the stairs one by one, careful not to jostle her body. Upon arriving, he opened the door to his room and stepped inside. He approached the bed. Just as Eric was about to lower Miesa down, her body jerked. Her eyes flew open. She let out a panicked sound and struggled in his arms, her hands flailing, her body twisting, her breath quickening. Reflexively, Eric tightened his hold to steady her. In a restrained but clear voice, he asked her to wait a moment, explaining that he was going to place her on the bed so she would not fall and hurt herself. He moved closer to the bed and lowered Miesa gently. As soon as her body touched the mattress, Eric released her. In an instant, Miesa retreated. Her body crawled low across the bed, pulling away from Eric with quick, reflexive movements, like a startled cat seeking a safe distance. Eric stood there silently for a moment, watching her retreating back. He said nothing. He simply looked at her, standing still. Miesa turned over and lay face down. Her blonde hair fell over her face. Unconsciously, she began to bite the ends of her own hair, chewing on it with a strange, innocent behavior. Eric watched without looking away. In his mind, he recalled the days since the princess had been by his side. He realized that Miesa had never truly shown any interest in him. He felt as though he was merely regarded as a means of transport. Eric's gaze remained fixed on Miesa. That thought subtly changed his expression. His eyes opened slightly wider than before. Amid the strands of blonde hair, Eric noticed something, a thin piece of string caught between them. Miesa's face became partially visible as she lifted her head slightly. Eric slowly extended his hand. His movements were gentle, unhurried, creating a warm and careful atmosphere between them. But before his fingers could touch her, Miesa reflexively pulled away. Her body moved back quickly, rejecting the sudden approach. Eric startled. His eyes widened, his hand stopping midair. He immediately said that he did not mean to startle her. In a polite tone, he explained that he only wanted to remove a piece of string caught in her hair, pointing to it with his index finger. This time he moved more slowly. The tips of his fingers lightly brushed her hair. The strand came loose and fell away. Eric withdrew his hand. Miesa lay face down again, hiding her face. Her body was no longer tense. Gradually, her posture changed. She placed both hands in front of her face, lowering her body and relaxing, resembling a cat that had finally begun to feel safe. Eric watched the sight in silence, momentarily captivated. He then spoke softly, saying that he once saw a cat that looked exactly like Miesa, with the purest white fur he had ever seen. That memory made Eric fall silent for a long moment. His lips unconsciously curved into a faint smile. Then Eric's expression changed. A thin smile suddenly appeared on Eric's face, so brief and rare that he reflexively covered his lips with his hand. Night fell over the Cladnir mansion. The large building sank into darkness, all lamps extinguished. Only the pale moonlight hung in the sky, reflecting off the roof and tall windows. Inside the bedroom, Miesa slept soundly. Her body curled lightly atop the bed. Her breathing was steady, accompanied by the occasional soft snore. Moonlight streamed through the window and landed on her face, highlighting a peaceful expression rarely seen during the day. In the same room, yet separated by distance and his work, Eric sat at his desk. Several candles burned beside him, serving as the only source of light. The flickering flames cast slow-moving shadows along the walls. Eric clenched a sheet of paper in his hand. On the desk lay an envelope sealed with red wax, resting among several other scattered documents. His expression was serious, his gaze fixed on the contents of the letter. Seen up close, it was clearly a letter neatly stamped with the royal emblem. The page was filled with writing. 2 names were written clearly, Maleka and Deal. At last, the names of the 2 servants were revealed. In silence, Eric's thoughts moved. He recalled how the palace servants had nearly every day entrusted the princess to the mansion's servants. He rested his chin on the back of his hand. In his mind, the conclusion formed on its own. Whenever there was an opportunity, the palace servants always left and disappeared. There had to be a hidden motive behind it all. Eric let out a quiet breath. His hand rose to press against his temple. His face tightened. The issue of food supplies for the estate's residents alone was enough to weigh heavily on his mind. There were simply too many things he had to think about at once. Eric's gaze fell on another envelope. It was sealed neatly with red wax. He picked it up and held it in his hand. For a moment, he simply stared at it with his head slightly lowered, as if hesitating to continue reading. There was one more matter weighing on his thoughts. Eric opened the letter. The first line was clear, a report addressed directly to him. He continued staring at the page without moving. The report went on, detailing the results of surveillance since the day he had given the order. The next image revealed a scene in the courtyard of a house. Under the cover of night, 2 figures stood close together, their bodies pressed together without any attempt to hide. The report continued. It was confirmed that even last night, they met at the same house on the outskirts of the city. The image drew closer. The faces were now clearly recognizable. A barmaid. And, more shockingly, she was with Lord Margrave Clydenier. The truth hung heavily in the air, mingling with the unsteady candlelight before Eric, marking a night that would offer him no peace. Eric's thoughts drifted back to the past. At that time, his father had suddenly proposed a marriage alliance with the daughter of the Crispin family. Before the soldiers and followers of House Clydenier, the proposal was accepted without much objection. What his father presented sounded reasonable, even logical. Yet Eric alone sensed something amiss. There was something about the proposal that felt wrong. He was certain his father would not suggest such a thing without a specific reason. That suspicion could not be ignored. From that day on, Eric secretly observed his father's every move. One day, he discovered a truth he had never expected. A woman, a barmaid, frequently visited his father's residence. For the first time, Eric witnessed the affair with his own eyes. He disliked what he saw. But in the midst of a war where lives were wagered daily, Eric felt it was not his place to make an issue of such matters. Even so, he continued investigating. He tried to determine whether his father maintained other connections with the woman, but nothing conclusive came of it. In the end, Eric chose to keep everything to himself. After the war ended, another truth came to light. His father brought the barmaid all the way to this territory. She was concealed as the new wife of Sir Kelvanic, his father's trusted aide. His father appeared deeply serious about her. Unable to continue pretending ignorance, Eric secretly sent a letter to his mother, enclosing the evidence he possessed. The reply he received was far beyond his expectations. Through Edel, his mother's personal attendant, he received a brief yet cold response. His mother was already weary of receiving such reports. She was old, and she did not mind if his father was given to someone else. In fact, she felt relieved that she no longer had to meet him every night. Eric was left speechless. His hand clenched the letter tightly. Sweat trickled down his cheek. In his mind, he thought if only that woman had been a noble, gathering information about her would have been much easier. But she was merely a commoner. Aside from Kelvanic, no one else ever visited the house on the outskirts of the city. Eric tossed the letter onto the desk. He let out a long breath, then lay back, staring at the ceiling with his eyes closed. All of his efforts at investigation felt futile. "It seems there's no new information," he muttered inwardly. To him, his mother's response was not strange. From what he had observed himself, the relationship between his parents resembled that of two partners who had simply built a family together. His thoughts were still immersed in that when a small sound came from the bed. Eric opened his eyes and turned his head. Miesa had woken up. She rubbed her eyes slowly and looked at Eric without saying a word. With unsteady steps, she walked toward the desk. Eric asked gently why she did not go back to sleep and whether she needed any help. There was no response. Miesa moved even closer. Eric called her name again, this time with a questioning tone. Still, Miesa seemed not to hear him. Suddenly, Miesa's hand rested lightly on Eric's shoulder. She immediately sat down on his lap. Eric's body stiffened at once. Miesa reached for the scattered papers on the desk. Eric reflexively moved to stop her, his hand remaining on Miesa's shoulder. He said that perhaps those were what had caught her interest, but added that their contents were not particularly interesting. Miesa, however, looked delighted. With a bright expression, she tore the paper into several pieces. Inwardly, Eric fell silent. The princess who had always avoided him was now approaching him of her own accord. Strangely enough, he did not feel disturbed at all. His thoughts turned inward to his own life, to his resentment toward the king, to the unpredictable situations he had been forced to face, and to the reality that this woman would live with him for the rest of his life. A strange feeling crept over him. Eric recalled the knight's oath he had sworn in his youth, an oath that had filled him with pride and responsibility. Yet, in the end, it was merely an oath of loyalty to his family. He was nothing more than a warhorse, fighting for the sake of the next generation. He had never held a clear image of what his future wife should be like. Even if his wife turned out to be someone who enjoyed tearing papers apart like this, he would not mind. More precisely, after recognizing his position and responsibility as the family's successor, He felt it was better that he did not form attachments to any woman at all. Both of Eric's hands remained on Miesa's shoulders. Miesa glanced at another sheet of paper and reached for it. Just as her fingers were about to touch it, Eric swiftly stopped her. He asked Miesa to stop. Her eyes widened in surprise. Eric grasped the paper and lifted it high. He said that this one could not be torn. Miesa looked up, whining softly as she tried to reach it. But Eric refused calmly. He said that whining would be useless. He had not finished reading that paper yet. Miesa continued staring at the paper, her mouth slightly open. And so, the night passed. Morning arrived bright and clear. Sunlight and birdsong filled the Kleidner estate. Inside the room, Lady Kleidner sat in a chair, holding a sheet of paper. Edel stood beside her. With a slight bow, Edel asked whether they should prepare a large fireplace in the greenhouse for the March festival. Lady Kleidner remained focused on her reading, her chin resting on her hand. She replied that a small fireplace would suffice, given that this year was colder than usual. Her words were cut short by a voice asking the princess to walk slowly and carefully. Miesa arrived, accompanied by a palace attendant. Lady Kleidner looked at her in surprise. The moment Miesa reached her, she collapsed and fell asleep. With a flat tone and a short sigh, Lady Kleidner remarked that this was troublesome. She said that over the past few days, the princess had always been with the servants, yet today she suddenly came to see her. Adil complained quietly that Lady Kleidner had referred to Miesa as the princess. In his opinion, she should address her as the young lady, like everyone else. Lady Kleidner realized her mistake. She had not yet decided on the appropriate form of address. Then, with a hint of humility, Lady Kleidner said that she had spent most of her time living on the border, and therefore was not well acquainted with palace etiquette. She then asked in a polite tone what title she should use when addressing the princess in such a case, Lady Deal. The attendant turned her face away with an unpleasant expression and replied curtly that she did not know. Lady Kleidner was not surprised. She had expected as much. In her heart, she thought that the attendant was not even trying to be courteous. Edil then smiled and said that he had looked into the matter. A similar case had occurred 3 generations earlier. At that time, Edvard's parents addressed the princess by her name, while Edvard himself called her my lady. Hearing this, Lady Kleidner decided to call the princess by her name. She called out, Miesa. Miesa startled immediately. Her eyes opened, and she sat up. The sight left them momentarily speechless. Then, unexpectedly, Miesa smiled sweetly at Lady Kleidner. Lady Kleidner found herself unable to speak. Soon after, Miesa collapsed again and fell back asleep. Lady Kleidner realized the princess had allowed her to call her by name. Miesa, she murmured softly, a very beautiful name. The palace attendant then said that it seemed the princess liked Lady Kleidner and asked whether she could leave Miesa there until dinner time. Lady Kleidner agreed and told the attendant to go and rest. After the attendant left, Adil let out a long sigh. He commented that the woman had deliberately tried to find fault over nothing more than a matter of address. Adil then reported that although Lady Deal appeared to laze about all day, she still bathed the princess every day. Meanwhile, Lady Maleka often went out and was rarely present in the mansion. Lady Kleidner smiled faintly, her chin once again supported by her hand. There must be a reason, she said softly, why they are so openly displaying their laziness. Lady Kleidner continued in a calm voice, saying that for now, they were merely following the rhythm of the palace servants. They did not know what was truly being hidden. Edil responded with a slow nod. He agreed that uncertainty was the most troubling part. Both of them were so focused on their conversation that they failed to notice Miesa had already awakened. Miesa lay on her side, propping her head with one hand while the other arm stretched out, her index finger pointing downward as she stared intently at the floor, as though she were seriously listening to their discussion. Then, holding her head, Lady Kleidner called Adil and asked him to fetch her headache medicine from her room. A short while later, Adil was seen approaching a servant. He asked whether the medicine was indeed the one Lady Kleidner usually took. The servant nodded, saying that it was always placed beside the lady's bed. Edil thanked them and turned around. His steps halted abruptly. Miesa, who had been some distance away earlier, was now standing right in front of Lady Cladnier. Edel walked closer and handed over the medicine, saying he had brought it. However, his gaze kept flicking toward Miesa. He placed the medicine on the table. Edel fell silent as he observed Miesa. In his heart, he thought, "This is strange. Never once had he seen his mistress allow someone to sit so close to her, let alone hug her knees like that." Hesitantly, Adil asked whether Lady Cladnier was all right and offered to call a doctor if her headache worsened. Suddenly, Lady Cladnier asked whether it was true that Miesa was 20 years old. Edel confirmed that Miesa was indeed 20. "I see," Lady Cladnier murmured softly, as if deep in thought. In her mind surfaced a rumor she had once heard that since childhood, Miesa had witnessed more than half of the palace's people being brutally beheaded. Her hand rose, gently stroking Miesa's head. She realized that this girl must have suffered so deeply that her sanity was difficult to maintain. Even now, she was being used for various purposes. Edel grew even more shocked by the sight. Inwardly, Lady Cladnier murmured again that Miesa was a pitiful child despite how beautiful she was. She then told Edel that Miesa's face was lovely and the color of her irises was captivating. All they needed to do was take good care of her and make sure she was well fed. Miesa remained silent, enjoying the touch without resistance. Hearing the praise about her eye color, Edel was startled. He stared at Miesa in confusion. Since when had his mistress paid attention to such details? Lady Cladnier continued, remarking that Miesa's messy hair always covered her face. As if she had heard her, Miesa lifted her head and turned toward Edel. Her face was now clearly visible, beautiful blue eyes, softly glowing. Edel's heart raced. That eye color? It resembled someone. The realization made his eyes widen. But before he could think further, Miesa rubbed her eyes, appearing fully awake at last. Lady Cladnier quickly changed the subject, saying that Miesa's nails needed trimming and her hair needed to be combed. Edel was still filled with curiosity. In his heart, he wondered, had his mistress been reminded of the child when she saw the princess? That question remained unanswered. The scene shifted. Eric was seen wiping sweat from his face. A soldier reported that Miesa had been with his mother since morning. Eric fell silent, clearly not expecting that. Footsteps echoed through the corridor as he walked toward his mother's room. From inside, Adil's voice could be heard, pleading that he should be the one to cut Miesa's toenails. Lady Cladnier refused, saying she was already accustomed to doing it herself. Edil looked uncomfortable but continued to insist he did not want his mistress doing a servant's work. When Eric entered, he froze. His eyes widened, his mouth fell open, unable to believe what he was seeing. His mother greeted him calmly, as if the situation were entirely ordinary. With a trembling voice, Eric asked what she was doing. The atmosphere grew awkward. His mother replied that she was trimming Miesa's toenails, because nails that long would surely make her uncomfortable. Eric fell silent. Sweat trickled down his face. A memory surfaced in Eric's mind. From his mother's usual character, she often showed sympathy toward others, but to go as far as touching someone's feet like that felt impossible. Wasn't his mother the type of person who was highly rational, someone who was often cold even toward her own son? Yet now, look at that expression filled with affection. There was one exception, the only one for her, the expression she used to show when his younger sister, Rosie, was still alive. There was a possibility that his mother was imagining the presence of her little daughter, Rosie, in the figure of the princess before her. Eric stepped closer. He asked for the scissors to be handed to him and said he would do it instead, but his mother refused. Then, with a bit of force, Eric took the scissors anyway, ignoring her words. The reason Eric was so worried was that he still clearly remembered what his mother was like on the day Rosie took her last breath. Eric then touched Miesa's foot, but in his mind, he was still uncertain had he done the right thing by stopping his mother like this. Miesa was slightly startled and glanced over, sensing the unfamiliar touch, but she remained calm. Adil let out a relieved sigh, thankful that the princess had not panicked. Miesa's eyes were open now, her lips holding back a laugh from the ticklish sensation. Suddenly, Adil heard a low growl. He glanced sideways and saw Miesa's face looking irritated and pouty. For a moment, he was confused about what was happening. From Miesa's expression, it was clear there was a strange, restless discomfort caused by Eric's touch. Edel quickly realized the situation and hastily took a piece of cake, placing it into Miesa's mouth. In an instant, the tense atmosphere dissipated. Everyone turned their heads in the same direction. Idil let out a sigh of relief. Then Eric asked Idil what he had just done. Idil explained that Miesa seemed calmer after chewing something sweet, and that she appeared to like snacks very much. Eric nodded, understanding Edil's explanation. His mother smiled as well, commenting on how sweet Miesa's expression looked while eating. Edil agreed with her. Meanwhile, Eric merely glanced at his mother, growing more confused by the changes he was witnessing. Night fell once more. In the dining room, Eric was feeding Miesa, reminding her not to swallow immediately and to chew slowly. Miesa's hair was messy, bits of food clinging to her cheeks and lips. Eric wiped her face with a cloth, all the while thinking about one thing. What exactly was it that his mother saw in the princess that reminded her of Rosie? Their only similarity was the color of their eyes. If that were the case, his cousin Embrick had the same eye color, yet his mother had never treated him specially. A knock sounded at the door. A bespectacled male servant entered, informing them that the roasted quail was ready. Eric told him to set it down and leave. As they ate together, Eric felt that Miesa was far calmer. But suddenly Miesa looked uncomfortable. She closed her eyes, held her head, and began coughing repeatedly. Eric panicked and asked what was wrong. Miesa struggled, her hands reaching out in rejection. She grabbed the plate of roasted quail and pushed it away. Eric immediately understood. He said he would remove the dish. Miesa grew even more restless, her body leaning closer, as if seized by trauma. Eric carried the food out and ordered a servant to take it away. As he closed the door, sweat streamed down his face. Why? Had the princess once fallen ill because of quail? Eric wondered anxiously. Miesa was still trembling, one hand pressed against her chest, the other clenched tightly like someone who had just been forced to remember an old wound.